Hello there, watching Sky News and the press preview. In the next half hour then, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Sun's political editor, Tom Newton-Dunn, and the Evening Standard columnist, Ayesha Hazarika. Hello, lovely to see you both.
Hello.
Plenty to discuss, as you will see from the front pages. The Guardian leading on a leaked document that it's obtained, which details the government's plans to end free movement immediately after Brexit. Well, the plans would toughen migration rules to deter lower-skilled EU migrants from the UK. That's on the front of the Financial Times. The Telegraph also leading with the leaked plans, which would mean low-skilled EU workers would have to leave after 2 years. The Times says the plans would include the introduction of residence cards and fingerprinting for some migrants. Same story for the Daily Mail, which says bosses will have to put British workers first under the proposals. Meanwhile, the Metro reporting on the arrest of 4 serving soldiers on suspicion of joining a banned neo-Nazi terror organisation. The Eye leading with comments from the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's hit out at Britain's unfair economy. The shortage of tens of thousands of nurses in the NHS, reportedly the worst ever, features on the front of the Mirror. And The Sun has a picture of Meghan Markle, who has spoken out about her relationship with Prince Harry and their love story. More on that to come, no doubt. But Tom and Ayesha, both wanting to start with the Guardian scoop. The Home Office obviously coming out and at pains to point out this is just a draft document at this stage.
Yeah, the Home Office are not confirming this as official policy. They're saying this is very much a leak, which they are not going to comment on. What's interesting about it, and the reason why the papers have seized upon it, is this is the first really kind of flesh on the bones on what a post-Brexit immigration policy could look like. And we all know that immigration was a huge centrepiece of the whole Brexit debate, and there's always going to be a lot of kind of drama when this comes out. Now, it looks like there's going to be quite, tough restrictions on low-skilled workers. I suppose you would effectively call it quite a hard Brexit, quite a kind of cliff edge in terms of, right, freedom of movement is effectively stopping. Now, there's going to be some people that will be delighted about that, but the people who won't be delighted about that are businesses. Businesses will be particularly worried because we do rely on a lot of low-skilled EU workers, particularly in the NHS, retail, agriculture, the care sector as well. And I think there will be a lot of businesses who will see, and of course the NHS, you mentioned the Mirror story where there is a huge shortage of nurses at the moment. Now, some people will say, look, we've got lots of people in this country you could skill up to do those jobs. That's very important. The government should absolutely put the money in to do that. But we need a transition period, because what's going to happen when we suddenly leave the EU? Do we just have these vast numbers of vacancies? So I think there is going to be quite a lot of concern from businesses. I think the Labour Party will obviously be quite against this. The Home Secretary recently announced an evidence-based study into looking at all the facts behind what the economy needs, sector by sector, region by region, seasonal work as well. I think people would have wanted to see a bit more detail from that. But the other people who will be quite upset about this, there will be some Conservatives as well who have been lobbying quite hard for there not to be a hard Brexit. People like Anna Soubry, Nicky Morgan. So this is a big story.
And already
tonight.
concern being expressed by newspapers like the remaining Financial Times, which talks about how this will mean tough hurdles to work in the UK for all but the higher skilled EU migrants. You've had Sadiq Khan, you mentioned Labour's response, Mayor of London, saying this reads like a blueprint on how to strangle London's economy, which will be devastating not just for our city but for the whole country. It risks thousands of families too being split up.
I love how you call the remaining Financial Times. It's like sort of a third part of their title. I have to say, I take a slightly different view on this than Ayesha does, which is much of this is really not very surprising at all. And furthermore, none of us should be very surprised to see any of this written down, for it is precisely the sort of arguments that people have been talking about for the last sort of 15 months post the campaign. What sort of migration system should we want to see? And also for, 6 months, during the campaign, especially the control and quite heavy controls on unskilled migrants. The sort of immigration we're not as keen on as skilled migrants who everyone, almost universally agrees a great boost to the economy.
So why are we not? Just remind ourselves why we don't want lower skilled migrants from the EU.
Simply because they come and take jobs that lower skilled Brits could just as easily do in construction or service
Price
sector
people out of
across the
jobs,
board,
for example.
and lower wages.
I'd like
there is. Hang on, just 10 seconds.
Okay,
there is. I'm sure you do.
I do. Yeah.
There is a huge potential drain on the indigenous workforce by having and the worst argument is the nurses' argument, which is if in need of labour, instead of skilling up Brits, just import them on the cheap from often Eastern Europe, which is absolutely nothing, quite frankly, for anybody. Not the nation's productivity, not the national economy, because a lot of that money might be going back to Eastern Europe, and it doesn't help Britain PLC.
Fewer are coming, of course, because the pound is not as strong, and therefore the wage differential isn't so big.
And the EU economy is growing.
Yes.
So they're getting good wages back in wherever they are.
So just on that, I think immigration is not a drain on the indigenous workforce. I think immigrants make a huge contribution to society, to culture. My parents were immigrants. They came to work in the NHS. I don't think they were sort of considered a drain. They also pay their taxes.
We were talking about low-skilled migrants.
Yeah, hang on.
Migration itself is not wrong.
What about
That's
the
important
low-paid
point.
people that work in our care homes and do really important jobs cleaning our... Probably these offices in Skye are cleaned by low-paid, unskilled workers. They still make a valuable contribution.
There's a lot of skill in polishing this floor, I can tell you.
Well, I can tell. It's very shiny. The point is, absolutely fine if you want to skill up people like the nurses, but then why is the government cutting bursaries for indigenous student nurses? And the other point in terms of...
That bit is very hard to
Yeah.
explain indeed. And the
Can I
point
just say
is
the other-
that if you're going to look at the UK workforce and replace, stop unskilled migration coming in such big numbers, you absolutely have to
But just
spend
on-
more
Yeah.
on
So
skilling up
what
British
you talk
workers.
about, you keep mentioning there's the Daily Mail's taken it, not surprisingly, Brexit plan to end mass migration from the EU. You keep talking about the Daily Mail story, worst nurse shortage ever. Is there any concern that there are 40,000 vacancies and we are cutting lower skilled migrants? Is that you're obviously expressing concern, but is there no government concern about that?
Well, there should be. My point simply is the fact that there are huge amounts of vacancies in the NHS doesn't necessarily have to be solved by migration. It should be solved, Ayesha's absolutely right, by
That takes
increasing
time.
skills of whoever might already be here and one of those 1.5 million people who are still unemployed. I think the wider point about why everyone is making such a big fuss about this leaked document, 82 pages worth of potential new ideas to the immigration system, is not necessarily because many of these ideas are brand new. It's just because the government have been slightly caught with their trousers down. They have said, we're going to go out, do a whole load of evidence-based inquiries, commission the Migration Advisory Committee, the independent panel of experts to come up with some good ideas, and then make up some policy. In fact, they made up 82 pages worth of policy, which they haven't been telling anyone about at all. So it's been leaked out of them. It has to be said, the massive caveat there is, of course, none of this is policy.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
blue sky thinking. And the one page The Guardian didn't publish, I'm told by people in the Home Office tonight, is a bit on the front of this 82 pages, which said very clearly, all this hasn't been agreed by ministers. It's all there still to be discussed and will change repeatedly as the months go on.
It's clearly a direction of travel, and I think the concern that people will have is whether you have a sort of cliff edge or whether you have a transitional period where you phase in controlling freedom of movement, which I think is something that will have to happen, and it is important. I think people want that in this country.
And the government
but
have committed to that.
Yeah, and the Labour Party has committed as well. But I think how do you do it in a way which doesn't take the economy off a cliff edge and all these businesses that need this labour? And I went to visit, I've been to speak to Leave areas where people voted Leave in Labour constituencies, small businessmen saying to me they definitely want to see freedom of movement controlled, but they don't want a cliff edge because they actually can't get local people to come and do the jobs. They need to get men to come over from Eastern Europe for their haulage companies, for their sort of, PVC
Fruit
glazing,
picking, fruit
all those kind of things.
distribution, yeah.
So these are levers who are saying they don't want an immediate end to it. So I think we just got, I think there is a balanced point.
Balance is the word.
Yes.
It's the absolute word. But this is the point. You know, none of this is necessarily going to happen tomorrow. And I think that some of the slightly more excited reactions to this, for example, Sadiq Khan, who's called this the worst possible thing that could ever happen.
Well, if
in the
it
City of
happened
London,
like this,
ever,
it would be
I
bad.
think is going about this in slightly the wrong way. You've got to listen to what the people voted for, whether you voted that way or not, at the same time as trying not to choke off the economy, and that is the
choking off the
million-dollar
economy
question.
is not what anyone voted for
dominating
either.
newspapers, there's the Times, immediate end to free movement after Brexit. The Telegraph up the top there too, Brexit plan to curb EU migrants, and the plans as outlined by that Guardian leak is cutting the number of lower-skilled EU migrants, offering them maximum residency of 2 years, and those in high-skilled occupations granted longer permits of 3 to 5 years, plus mandatory passports needed to be shown, and so on. So a lot of detail in those stories. Should we move to the Eye, the Archbishop, speaking out against austerity and the unfairness of the economy?
Well, look, one of the reasons people are so worried about the effects that Brexit could have on the economy is because of austerity. You know, it's a huge issue across the country. I think it's one of the reasons which drove the Brexit vote, actually. And I don't think people voted to be poorer, and everybody wants to see more money going into local services, supporting the things that we've just talked about, skilling young people, particularly those people that don't go to education, helping nurses, you know, that type of thing. But the Archbishop Welby has made a really important intervention where he has basically said inequality is huge in this country now. Lots of other think tanks have been pointing to this. The Resolution Foundation has done a lot of work on this, and income inequality is absolutely huge at the moment. Living standards have been massively squeezed. We've got people going back to school this week. Teachers have actually seen their kind of salaries fall by about £5,000 in real terms because of the rise in inflation. Similarly, nurses. So this issue of Brexit intersecting with austerity is a big issue.
Funnily enough, actually, having read a little bit of it, and the Archbishop of Canterbury has written a long piece in the FT tomorrow as well, it's actually not that much about austerity. His point is capitalism is going wrong in the country. Huge amounts, too much money getting paid to fat cat company bosses, while ordinary workers' wages have flatlined for 10 years. People are therefore getting fed up with capitalism, and the system simply must change, or guess what? They'll all go and vote for Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I think it explains some of the appeal.
It really does. I mean, that's the point. The appeal. You know, if we lose faith in capitalism, it will go down this way. It needs
You're eating
badly
into your Merkel sandwich. I know you're.
You want to do Merkel now?
No, not now. I need to take a break. But we will talk about all but an engagement announcement. What have we learned from Meghan Markle's first big interview about her love? Back in a moment. Her love.
You little Baron.
Welcome back to the press preview. We are taking a look through the newspapers, joined tonight by Tom Newton-Dunn, who can't wait to tell you about Meghan Markle. I honestly, it's true, and also Ayesha Hazarika. But first of all, let's talk about one of the main stories of the day, which is that 4 British soldiers have been held in this neo-Nazi terror crackdown. We've seen, obviously, the rise of the right wing in Europe and obviously in America as well. So what's this one about?
One of the most shocking stories I think I can remember learning about in years, really, simply because it's so massively out of character of the modern-day British Army. 4 serving soldiers, 3 of them from the Royal Anglian Regiment, a very respected infantry regiment which won huge plaudits and battle honours in Afghanistan, year after year defending the line against the odds against the Taliban out there, arrested for being members of this proscribed terrorist organisation, appallingly ugly, right-wing, homophobic, racist group called National Action, linked very heavily to the man who killed Joe Cox. And I suppose the sad thing is this is now going to sort of precipitate a huge, long debate about, you know, is the army riddled with racism? Was the army the sort of thing that produced, you know, crazed people who believe in this sort of deranged views? And I have to say, having been a defence journalist for 10 years, overwhelming the answer is absolutely not. And these, if they are obviously convicted, will be a very, very few number of very rotten apples in a massive barrel, incredibly impressive, highly motivated people we should be very proud of.
Yes, and just been questioned at this stage, one should point out. Let's move on, shall we, to... Which one is it? Times, I think it is, isn't it? And this is a mass exodus, which is leading to real questions for Aung San Suu Kyi.
Huge stain cast over the reputation of Aung San Suu Kyi. She was a symbol for human rights and, you know, alleviating suffering. and she is basically presiding over a regime which is committing genocide on the Rohingya people, which are a Muslim people in Burma. They are fleeing in their thousands to Bangladesh. There are reports of rape, murder, children being left for dead in the mud. It is a horrific situation. The UN Secretary General has appealed for international help. UN aid is not getting through to these people. Even the Pope has said this is outrageous. And the woman who is sitting presiding over this, who has said nothing about it and is doing nothing about it, is Aung San Suu Kyi. And now there is a huge petition to have her stripped of her Nobel Peace Award, which seems to be a very hollow accolade to give to somebody who's overseeing this.
And the only defence seems to be that her supporters are not great fans of the Rohingya, and therefore that's why she's not speaking out at this stage.
Well, it's absolutely outrageous, and she's even questioning independent verifiers who are saying, look, this is terrible, this is a genocide. So it's cast a huge stain over her. Her behaviour has been absolutely shameless.
Tom's looking twitchy because he wants
Sorry
to
about that important. Right. Let's get on to the really important story.
So the BBC do this thing, right, when there's a big royal story, and they say, maybe Sky needs to do it, the BBC loved it, and they say, there was a terrible media scrum yesterday when... And then they go on to gossip about the royal stories, just like you two, who pretending you have no interest in this.
No. Can I just say for the viewers, Tom, I've never seen Tom so excited about a story. I mean, talk about sparkle, it's all about Markle, it's ridiculous.
That rhymed, and I'll tell you what.
Tell us, Tom.
The incredible lengths that Ayesha was going to in the green room, saying, is she really going to do it?
No, I was not.
Anyway, moreover, the story. So, Meghan Markle, Prince Harry's girlfriend, has done a big interview in Vanity Fair, embargoed for all the papers tomorrow, with some pretty glamorous pictures of her as well, in which she says the most extraordinary things. To start with, she's talking about their relationship, but the language she uses is really quite... I know I'm getting pumped up about this.
You've got 45 seconds to...
I would cut that.
But it's very emotive. She talks about our great love story, which makes a man cringe. We're British. I think this is going to be the problem with this interview, because we're British. We didn't really like to boast about, our relationships, and we like
also,
to...
you're a man, so any thought of commitment is terrifying, let's be quite honest.
Happily married man for 13 years, I'll have you know. But, and here's the killer, here's the bit you've been waiting for.
Yes, Tom, please.
She says to Vanity Fair lots of things
quickly,
about
Tom,
how...
don't leave us hanging.
It's part of what makes it so special, that it's just ours, but we're happy. Personally, I love a great love story. In the future, we'll have to come out and talk about ourselves more, but for now, it's just for us. What does she mean? They're engaged,
On
surely.
that thought, we have to say goodnight. Tom Newton Dunn,
what a
Ayesha
cliffhanger.
Hazarika. Thank you.